Tlanatea, hello. Welcome to the opening keynote address of the 2021 Planetary Health Annual Meeting, co-hosted by the University of Sao Paulo and the Planetary Health Alliance. This year's conference theme is Planetary Health for All, Bridging Communities to Achieve the Great Transition. I'm very, very humbled to welcome all of you here today, to be with you, to sit in relationship with you, as we begin this week's journey to reestablish, reconnect, revitalize, and interconnect with all of our Mother Earth relatives, no matter if they have 2 legs, 4 legs, wings, fins, stems, or leaves. Each of these relatives has its own story to tell us about how to live together in a good way on this planet, if only we are willing to listen. My English name is Nicole Redverse. My traditional name is Niklose, and I'm a member of the Deninuque First Nation, Indigenous peoples from subarctic Canada. The Katlodeche First Nation in my area talks about Dene, with de meaning flow, and ne meaning land. So we as the Dene peoples are literally flowing from the land and the land from its people, a direct reference to our interconnection with our space. The concept of flowing from the land roots us Dene in our landscapes and creates the culture. And as such, the teachings about the land serve as the essence of our being. And when there is separation from the land, dysfunction arises. It's important to note that my Indigenous way of being, my way of knowing, and my lived experience has been informed by tens of thousands of years of memories that are stored in my region's stories. And with this comes a responsibility to honor and acknowledge Mother Earth first and foremost, in addition to my ancestors, as well as your ancestors, and all elders past, present, and future from the 4 directions. I also want to acknowledge the Tupiniquim Indigenous peoples and their traditional lands where the University of Sao Paulo is situated, the University of Sao Paulo being one of the host organizations for this event. I also want to acknowledge the Massachusetts peoples and their traditional lands where Harvard University is situated, the other co-host for this event. And I want to acknowledge all of my relatives and their lands around the globe, the original stewards of the land, and we are grateful for your presence within our event here and look forward to continuing to uplift your voices in this important space. I am very pleased, however, now to also have the great honor of acknowledging our very special speaker today, Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. Dr. Kimmerer is a mother, a scientist, a decorated professor, and author of many publications and books, including the amazing book titled Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants, which is one of my personal favorite books. She has previously addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations on the topic of healing our relationship with nature, and is the founder and director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, whose mission is to create programs which draw on the wisdom of both Indigenous and scientific knowledge for our shared goals of sustainability. I have personally appreciated her strength-based approach to the work she does, building back a relationship to land through a deep understanding of respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility that transfers directly into teachings about our kinship relationships with plants and all other planetary elements and beings. She has written that science polishes the gift of seeing, Indigenous traditions work with the gifts of listening and language. Please allow me now to extend the warmest of welcomes to Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer. Masi Cho, thank you for being here in relationship and sharing with us here today and being in community with us. Masi.
Miigwech, Nicole. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I will say in our beautiful Potawatomi language, Bojo Jayak, Shabadas Gegish Kokwen Deshnakas, Bodwe Wadmikwenda, Megazedo dem, Minwa Makodo dem, Miigwech Kinegego Gamijang. I don't speak much of my beautiful Potawatomi language, But because it is an endangered species, our teachers ask us to breathe life into it and share it with the world as often as we can. In my language, I told you that my name in Potawatomi is Shabbat Kokwe. I'm a Potawatomi Anishinaabe woman of the Bear Clan of the Eagles, and I am so honored and grateful to be with you here today. We are spending so much time inside looking at our screens, just as we are now. So I want to bring our relatives here to join us. It is also part of Potawatomi protocol that we always begin with gratitude. Miigwech, thank you to one another as people for the privilege of being in one another's company today, for this beautiful day, that we are whole and healthy. Gratitude that when we first put our feet on Mother Earth this morning, we had everything that we need. That breath of sweet spring air, a glass of water, food to drink, the companionship of our families and friends, and our more than human relatives. Gratitude also to the original peoples in whose homelands each of us stands today, to whom we owe an unpaid debt of history and land and knowledge of flourishing on this beautiful planet, and for the gifts of the earth with which we are showered every single day. And you know, although we live in this world made of gifts, most of us find ourselves harnessed to institutions and to an economy that is relentlessly asking us, what more can we take from the earth? And this worldview of unbridled exploitation is, to my mind, the greatest threat to the life that surrounds us. It is a threat to the very idea of sustainability. Isn't the question that we need? Come on, slides. Uh-oh. Oh no. Hold on. Let's see what's going on here. My slides are not advancing. There we go. Isn't the question that we need, what does the earth ask of us? And this question of what can we give is so powerfully part of the Indigenous tradition. And today, what I want to do is to talk about how much more we learn and understand about our relations with the living world when we look through both the lens of Western science and the lens of Indigenous science. For example, let's take that term sustainability, that in a sense brings us here together. There is this notion that sustainability means, right? These are our conventional definitions that you know them all. You don't need to read them, right? It's this notion that we can live in such a way that we can ensure the continued attainment of human needs, ensuring future generations' abilities to do the same. A colleague of mine, Carol Crow, an Algonquin biologist, said that she shared these definitions of sustainability with her tribal council when she was asking for a opportunity to go to a sustainability meeting. And when her elders said, well, what is sustainability? And she thought, well, that's the way our people have lived so well in our homelands since time immemorial. And they read these definitions, they heard about them, and they said, yes, you go to that meeting, but you go to that meeting and carry this message. That sounds to me like they're trying to find a way to just keep on taking. It's always just taking, and it's not right. When your feet hit the ground in the morning, when your feet first touch Mother Earth, we should be thinking, what is it that we have to give? For chief among the teachings of our Indigenous peoples is that each of us has a coupled gifts and responsibilities. That just like the stars were given the gift of that shine, they were given the responsibility to guide us at night. The birds were given the gift of song and the responsibility to sing up the sun. We too have paired gifts and responsibilities, and we have ignored them. It seems to me that for the past couple of centuries, just an eye blink of time in our lifetime of our species, we've been doing an unintended experiment that has very tangible manifestations. We have unwittingly asked what would happen if we believed in this pyramid of human exceptionalism. What if a single species out of the millions who inhabit the planet was somehow more deserving of the richness of the earth than any other? Human exceptionalism, I believe, lies at the foundation of many of our crises. And not only that, when we think about this experiment that we're doing, that all of the laws, which some have, the natural laws, which constrain growth and consumption, do not apply to us at the top of that pyramid, that the laws of thermodynamics have somehow been repealed just on behalf of our own species, enabling infinite growth on a finite planet. I don't think so. This experiment tests the hypothesis of what would happen if we behaved as if the Earth was nothing more than stuff, strictly material, utilitarian view of the Earth, and moreover, that all that stuff belonged to us. Well, as we know, the results of that experiment are in, and we find ourselves teetering at the edge of a precipice of climate catastrophe, entering what evolutionary biologists are calling the age of the sixth extinction, in which we are losing 200 of our species relatives every single day. What does the earth ask of us? The earth asks us to change. And yet, so much of our environmental discourse is all about changing light bulbs. And don't get me wrong, new technologies are a very important response to the crises that we face. But as a scientist, I don't think it's more technology that we need, more data, or even more money. If we are to survive, and if our more than human relatives are to survive with us as well, we need to change more than light bulbs. We need a change in worldview. I would echo the teachings of my friend and mentor, the great Oren Lyons, who said that after his 90 years of work in environmental advocacy, he says it all comes down to 4 words: values change for survival. To change our values away from thinking about land in the West through that Western lens of land as capital, land as natural resources, as if land had no value until it was converted, land as property, thinking about land as property for which we claim rights to do with as we please, land as a source of ecosystem services. Through one lens, through one worldview, this is how we see the terrain that we inhabit. But if we look through the Indigenous lens, we know land to be the source of our identity, land certainly as our sustainer, as this home not only for us, but of our more than human relatives. Land as our ancestral connection, connection to the ones who made the path for us here, and connections to our descendants for whom we make the path. Land as our library, our teacher, our source of knowledge, land as our healer, land as inspirited, land as home, land not as rights, not as rights to property, but land as the place where we enact our moral responsibility to all of creation, because the land is sacred. In the last 500 years, I think we're living in this time of profound error. But for much of humans' time on the planet, before this great delusion of human exceptionalism, we lived in cultures which understood ourselves not as masters of the universe, but as the younger brothers of creation. And this scientific worldview, which has so dominated our landscape like a monoculture for the last 500 years, has yielded tremendous gains in the quality of human life, without question. It has brought huge advances in knowledge, but it's not more knowledge we need at this moment. What we need right now is wisdom. And generating wisdom simply is not within the purview of science alone. We need a science which draws upon, yes, the mind and the body, emotion, and spiritual knowledge. We need traditional ecological knowledge and wisdom, which is based on the recognition that we humans are not atop a pyramid of life, but are one member of the democracy of species governed by laws of interdependence. It is a model of kinship. This time that we live in, of great change and great choices, has been spoken of by our ancestors in the teachings of the prophecy of the seventh fire. It is a very long and beautiful story, an important one told by our Anishinaabe peoples of the Great Lakes. And today I will share just a tiny fragment of that story. In this story, the fire is understood both as our spiritual fire, our cultural traditions and life ways, but each fire also refers to an era in history. And part of the history of our peoples is a migration from when we began on the eastern seaboard among our Wabanaki relatives. The teachings of the people of the seventh fire talk about all of the changes that will come here to Turtle Island throughout the seven fires of our history. They are stories of loss and tragedy and of courageous resilience and of the arrival of newcomers and the losses that arose from colonialism and attempted genocide. It's said that each time the people moved west to where the food grows on the water, to their long-term home, their spiritual place, we are told that along the way, teachers arose, prophets, if you will, who warned of the changes that were to come. You could think of these times of loss in which people were separated from their land, separated from each other, when the land suffered the wounds of colonialism, when our religions were forced underground, when our languages started to go to sleep. You could think of these times of the last 500 years of Homo industrialis as the age of dismembering ecosystems, communities, soils, watersheds, communities, peoples. That word to dismember, to cut apart, to exclude, to isolate and cut off, so that what was once whole lies broken in pieces. As a result, many humans in this moment feel ourselves to be outcasts, no longer belonging, no longer no longer members. It is said in the time of the migration and the losses that befell our people that there will come a time when the people will find themselves in a time when you can no longer dip a cup into the stream and drink, when the air is too thick to breathe, and the plants and animals themselves will begin to turn their faces away from us. It is said that in that time, we will know it as the seventh fire time, and Native people and all the world's people will stand at a fork in the road. All of this has come to pass, and we know we do stand at that fork. It is what brings us together today. In my imagination, one of the paths is soft and green and spangled with dew. You could walk barefoot there. and one of the paths is black and burnt, made of cinders that would cut your feet. The prophecy tells us that we must make a choice between the path of materialism and greed that will destroy the earth, or the path of care and compassion, of Bamadiziwin, of the good life in balance. And we know what we want, but we're also told that we can't just walk forward. The people of the seventh fire must instead walk backwards and pick up what was left for us along the ancestors' path. The stories, the teachings, the songs, each other are more than human relatives who were lost along the way, and our language. And when we have found these, and once again placed these medicines in our bundles, the things that will heal us, then we can walk forward on that green path. What do we find along the ancestors' path that will heal us and bring us back into balance? What do we love too much to lose that we will pick it up and carry it through the narrows of climate change safely to the other side? For there is another side. The prophecy teaches that the people of the seventh fire will need great courage and creativity and wisdom, but that they will lead us to the lighting of the eighth fire of friendship and peace with the world and with one another. It is said that we are the people of the seventh fire, you and me. And to make that transformation, one of the things that we must pick up along the ancestors' path are the stories and the teachings that are in response to that question of what does the earth ask of us, so that we may be courageous seventh fire people and light the eighth fire. What does the earth ask of us? To listen, as Nicole said, to listen. And in this year, which is the warmest ever recorded, when glaciers are melting and storms rising, and hundreds of our fellow species are in grave danger, I don't know about you, but I am longing for a wise grandma who could guide us in this perilous time along that good path. And one of the hallmarks of Indigenous knowledge is listening and learning from the land by listening to intelligences other than our own. A hallmark of Indigenous knowledge is to learn from the land. We don't have to innovate our way out of this dilemma alone. We have our teachers, our grandmother teachers, the plants. And in many Indigenous traditions, our plants are understood as among our oldest teachers. They've been here on earth far longer than we have, and they embody the virtues of honor and generosity. Who better to look to for guidance than those who can take light and air and water and turn it into food, and then they give it away, who make medicines and distribute them for free? We might well learn from them. And forward thinking scientists have this parallel, so called new area of study based on the intelligence of nature for design, engineering, environmental problem solving, called biomimicry, the notion that we can learn from the living world, how nature has evolved solutions. Predictably, the science of biomimicry has so far been restricted to learning what new products might be made. What interests me is what they might teach us about how we might live. And if plants are our teachers in this time of crisis, what will they teach us about response to climate change if we were willing to listen and to learn? Plants know what to do about climate change. They don't dither in the ineffectual conferences and debate carbon tax structures. They get to work. They can be a model for the transformation that we need. And think about it, they have already converted completely to a solar economy. And you've probably heard that entrepreneur Richard Branson has established the Virgin Earth Challenge to spur design of new technology that would remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it while we are transforming to a fossil fuel free economy. It's a lofty goal, this technology, critical deployment of human creativity on behalf of the climate. And the prize is $25 million. Human ingenuity can certainly be part of the solution, but we have to keep in mind that there is already a system that pulls carbon from the atmosphere and stores it for centuries. It has even more bells and whistles. It generates oxygen at the same time. It builds soil, protects biodiversity, it purifies water, it makes bird song, and it makes us feel happy and peaceful. It's called a forest. I say, give the prize to the trees. Plants don't put CO2 into the atmosphere, they take it out and sequester it in long term storage in the bodies of tree trunks, in 12-foot deep roots of prairie grasses, in deep bogs of peat, in organic matter of soils. Plants have been sequestering carbon since the beginning, removing it from the air and putting it in the ground. Let's follow their lead and join the movement to keep it in the ground. What do plants do when the climate changes? If there's more CO2, as there is, they can grow faster through the so called CO2 fertilization effect. But hard as they might try, they run up against other ecological limiting factors. They grow full tilt, but then they soon run out of other things like nitrogen and soil and water, which are in ever shorter supply. Plants don't degrade the soil, they build it. Plants don't degrade water, they purify it. And when we stand in a shower of spring rain, we have the plants to thank for that. Cut down enough forests and the rain disappears. Plants save the water. As the world heats up, who is it that creates oases of shade? Who cools our cities and urban heat islands? But the trees, doing sophisticated air conditioning without using a single watt of electricity. They don't ruin the land, they heal it. They are our teachers of restoration. We remember that the plants have not succumbed to despair. They are growing on the mine waste. They are healing land. They're storing carbon and holding biodiversity. They make food, they make medicine, they make beauty. They give more than they take. They heal the people and heal the earth. Surely we can do the same. Our climate solutions must include a faith and restoration of nature's inherent capacity for healing in halting deforestation, replanting, afforestation, ecological restoration, protecting wetlands, regenerative agriculture, all of these things that we know to help our relatives, the plants, doing the work that they can do. And yet, in our climate solutions, only about 8% of all of the resources are flowing to these natural solutions. And the sad truth is that carbon budget models, excuse me a second, be sure of my time here. Um, the sad truth is that carbon budget models indicate that we're already past the point when we can rely entirely on forests to reestablish carbon dioxide balance. And even if we could protect and invigorate them, we've simply added too much carbon to the atmosphere and cut down too many forests, so that in the short term, we have crippled the planet's ability to respond. The plants can't do this alone. They need us. We need system change to revert from climate change. Yes, individuals are part of the solution, but we all know that our individual acts of reducing carbon footprint are a small fraction of the carbon emissions from institutions and industry, fed by subsidized reliance on fossil fuels, fed by a capitalist economy that incentivizes destruction for private gain over the common good. It's time to imagine and implement a new economy for the future based on ancient ideas. It's not enough anymore to protect the remnants of the living world. We need to heal the wounds we have caused, to stop the degradation, and to fix it. What does the earth ask of us? Restoration, to put our gifts and our responsibilities to the work of healing. Ecosystem restoration is one of our most profound forms of planetary healing. It is a way in which we can give back for all of the gifts of the earth. But you know, in working in the field of restoration ecology for some time now, I've come to understand that it's not just the land which has been broken, it's our relationship to land that's been broken. And our work is in healing our relationships to land at the same time that we heal the earth herself. My friend and colleague Gary Nabhan says that restoration must include what he calls restoration. And in restoration, we have an opportunity to change that worldview, to tell a different story about our relationship to land. Excuse me. And thank you for that beautiful water. A different story, from the story of human exceptionalism to a story of kinship with our more than human relatives. In so doing, as we stand at this path, we can show respect to the living world by respecting the personhood of all beings. We're looking here, of course, at the sacred Wanganui River, led by Maori activists and great thinkers and healers. They set the stage for the personhood of the Wanganui River, extending the legal rights of personhood to a river. This is part and parcel of the rights of nature movement, which is represented today in the UN Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, which is before the United Nations today. We need acts of restoration, not only for polluted waters and degraded lands. We need a restoration of honor to the way that we live. And the reward is not just this feel good sense of responsibility, it can save all of our lives. Our economies and our institutions enmesh us in a profoundly dishonorable harvest. Collectively, by assent or by inaction, we have chosen the policies we live by, and we can choose again. Among the teachings of Native peoples that we might pick up along that seventh fire path is a code of ethics and practice that guides us for how we take from the earth. It doesn't say we don't take from the earth. We have to. We are animals. We don't have that gift of photosynthesis, but we do have the responsibility for care for all of those who sustain us. The honorable harvest, I don't have time to talk about all of it today. So let's just let the teachings sit with us. When we take from the earth, be it berries, be it fossil fuels, be it water, we never take the first one. We restrain our consumption. We ask permission before we take, because taking without asking permission is known as stealing. And when we ask permission, we have to listen for the answer. We can listen with science, we can listen with intuition, we can listen with spirituality, we can listen with policy and with law. But if the answer is no, we go home empty handed because the world does not belong to us. The honorable harvest reminds us to take only that which we need and use everything that you take. These are lives, gifts of lives that have been given you. We don't dishonor them by waste. We take in such a way that minimizes harm, and we give our thanks. Practicing radical, deep gratitude is one of the most powerful ways we have of being in reciprocity with the earth. Share everything you've taken, reciprocate the gift. This we can pick up along the ancestors' path. What does the earth ask of us? The earth asks us to change. As everything changes and evolves, like the flesh-tearing Allosaurus who became a warbler singing from the treetops when the time for flesh-tearing was over. For if we don't change, we will, like all that does not change and adapt, perish. The earth herself is changing by our hands. The responses from our government leaders to the clear and present danger of climate catastrophe has been wholly inadequate in scale, in urgency, and in imagination. Most take the approach that to solve the climate problem, we must in some way change the environment. They propose wave turbines and ocean fertilization, seawalls, photoelectric paint. We will no doubt need all of the good new ideas we can get. But while we race around asking how we might change technology, the change that might save us goes unspoken. What we need to change is ourselves. The danger is that we have been captured by a worldview that no longer serves the world, if it ever did. A worldview whose manifestation is destroying our beloved homelands, our fellow species, and ourselves. We need a change in hearts, a change in ethics, away from the anthropocentric worldview that considers the earth our exploitable property, to a biocentric, life-centered worldview in which an ethic of respect, kinship, and reciprocity can grow. Just as we witness and recount the story told in the Seven Fires of dismembering, we know that we find ourselves today as part of the era of remembering. Remembering stories, language, recipes, ceremonies, tools, plant names, animal ways, medicines, remembering what our ancestors brought us here for and what our descendants ask of us. Not only remembering, but remembering, once again becoming members of our great human family and members of the family of more than human beings, renewing our bonds of kinship. It's not enough, though, to just remember. We're not called only to pick up what was left for us, but to create new stories, new words, new medicines for this moment, so that we leave behind our own wisdom and tools for our descendants, just as the ancestors left this for us. This is the essence of adaptation, acts of imagination, drawing upon indigenuity, our artists, our scientists, our healers, our leaders, our writers who help us learn the stories we need to guide us through the narrowing. The great philosopher Joanna Macy has called this the great turning, the essential adventure of our time, shifting from the age of industrial growth to the age of life-sustaining civilization. Her work and the work of countless others, including you, describes the accelerating momentum of the transition in progress as humans reclaim an ancient way of knowing in which human life is aligned with ecological processes, not against us. The question is, will the circle of the great turning turn in time to save us? And that's up to us. What does it mean to be people of the seventh fire, to walk back along the ancestral road and pick up what was left for us? None of us can recognize every piece, let alone carry it all. We need each other to take a song, a story, a tool, and put it in our bundles. Not for ourselves, but for the ones yet to be born, for all our relations. Collectively, we assemble from the wisdom of the past and our vision for the future, a worldview shaped by knowing that what's good for the land is good for the people. When we heal the land, we heal ourselves. When we remember that all flourishing is mutual. Mi'u miigwech, Thank you for listening.
Wow. Dr. Kimmerer, I'm Sam Myers, Director of the Planetary Health Alliance. I've been given the honor of asking some questions. For all of you listening, there is a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can add questions. We have a few minutes. What I really want to do is sit quietly with your words for a while and not have to speak at all, because they're beautiful. And there's so many threads through what you said that resonate, I think, with the planetary health community. In particular, the understanding that innovation in our technologies actually will be very important in figuring out ways to live on the land with a smaller ecological footprint, but that they certainly won't be sufficient, and that we do need what we've been calling the great transition, and this meeting is about, or what Joanna Macy calls the great turning. We need a new path. We need new stories. I guess I want to start by asking you, as you've moved through the world and shared your perspectives, have you seen seedlings? Have you seen early efforts at that shift in worldview, at that re-storyation that you're talking about? How do we do that? There was a first question about educating our children, for example, and I think about academia and the university where you work and where I work, where the kind of wisdom that you're sharing is nearly absent, and where the focus is so much on a sort of Western scientific perspective. So how do we shift story? I know how we figure out innovation and technology, we're good at that, but how do we as a global society begin to shift the stories that we tell ourselves about our place in the world and our relationship to each other and nature?
First, I want to respond to your remark that do you see it happening in the world? And I want to say that I do. And I imagine that you all do too, in the work that you are pioneering in service to life. And it's not happening by our so-called leaders, but it's as if people have taken the charge and said, well, if our leaders won't lead, then we will. And I see all sorts of very hopeful and innovative ways of listening to the land and modeling our behaviors accordingly. How do we change, though? How do we change that story? You know, I have really despaired about this, because how do we change a story? But then I really came to understand, by talking with so many elders who shared this knowledge as well, is that to remember those old teachings, that the only one that we can change is ourselves. But stories give us an imagining and a vocabulary for how we might change ourselves. If we think that this Western worldview that we've been living with for 500 years is the only one, then we are trapped. Our imaginations don't let us even conceive of new stories, which is why it's so important to embrace this pluralism of stories and worldviews, because then we see that there are worldviews and ways of being on this planet that led to thriving. There are alternatives. So I think we listen to each other and know that we can change our own minds. I can't topple the fossil fuel industry. Darn. I can't topple Monsanto, but I can change how I think. And every one of us can do that. And that's how shift happens, is when we change how we think and no longer refuse, or then we refuse to be complicit with destruction.
Thank you. I'm looking at our questions. I'm seeing an enormous amount of gratitude for your inspiration. Here's a question about your view on how we talk to people that don't believe that sort of planetary health is the right path, that aren't ready to share your diagnosis that we've gone astray and aren't prepared to get on a different path. So how do we open ears to the new stories that that we need to be telling?
I think one of the important pieces of that story comes from all of us asking ourselves of, are we being good ancestors? When I think about this common ground, you're talking about folks who aren't on this path, right? How do more of us move to that path? I think the common ground is that we all want to be good ancestors. We want to leave a world that is that our children will honor us for, and couching it in terms of how do we be good ancestors tends to, I think, prioritize things like air to breathe and being able to live with the companionship of forests and birds. We all want that for our children. So that's a way, I think, is to help everybody ask themselves, what does it mean to be a good ancestor?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I think we've sort of stumbled on in the field of planetary health is identifying a way that integrates all of the different ways that we're disrupting and transforming our planet's natural systems, that ultimately brings them into focus in terms of human health and well-being. And so it makes it quite clear as a science that we can't continue down this path, not only because it's morally wrong and because it's broken in terms of its relationship to nature, but also because it's entirely inconsistent with safeguarding the health of our children. And there's almost no group anywhere in the world that isn't concerned about their children and future generations. And so as we understand with the mind part of us that this path doesn't work if we want to protect the health of our children, I think it creates an openness maybe in the heart part of us for these new stories. And then I guess the question is, how can we be, as a community, be ready with those stories as people become more and more receptive to them? I don't know if you have any thoughts about how we get ready for that moment of receptivity.
Mm, that is a wonderful question. And I've thought a lot about this in terms of what are the compelling stories. And when I look at the Indigenous storytelling tradition, it's full of what I would think of as kind of cautionary tales about what happens when we disrespect the water. The spring dries up. When we disrespect the corn, it doesn't grow back the next year. So certainly thinking about those consequential kinds of teachings. But I also think that we have tremendous opportunity and power to step away from not only this thinking that when we want to go to a new place, to a new story, to this transition that you all are working for, it can't just be being pushed from behind by fear. I think what we need to do is to have this imagination of how we might live so that we are propelled to walk, indeed dance toward it, because it's so beautiful and nourishing and makes us happy. So I think oftentimes in our work, we forget that part. We think about pushing from behind with fear and dread, and it hasn't completely brought us where we need to be, right? So how do we lead with love? How do we lead with love, not only for our own children, but for frog children and for beetle children and all the children of the earth?
Wonderful. There are questions about whether there's any hope of having your books translated into Portuguese. You've got a big audience in Brazil, clearly. Has there been any talk of getting your books translated?
Yes, it's translated into, I think there are like 11 different languages right now. And I don't think Portuguese is one, but I'll give a nudge to my publisher. Thank you for that, folks.
And then here's a question. Blessings and gratitude for this authentic and vital session. I work with child health is planetary health, which is one of our sort of sub-communities in the planetary health world. What are your thoughts on how to best engage children from across the globe on the great transition and the part they can play using storytelling approaches?
Mm. Oh, I love that question. And, when I think about children in this transition, children know so many things that we have been taught that we need to unlearn. Um, and one of the things that particularly strikes me is I think a lot about language. And well, I was with my toddler grandchildren who, look at the flowers coming up and they say, "Oh, look, she's growing. He's growing." They don't think about the world as it. They think about the world as relatives. They know the world is relatives, and then we teach them not to. And this notion of itting the world, of objectifying the world, so that we think we live, that the earth is like this big shopping bag of commodities instead of a web of relations, is the story that we need to change. And kids know it already. So I feel like what we need to do is to embrace that sense of relatedness and respect for the living world that they already have, and learn from them.
It's a great point. All right, well, I think we're getting a little bit short on time. There's one maybe last question from Lisa Walker. Can we develop a world repository of poetry and stories that spark the imagination about nature and a new worldview? I'd like to work on this. And it's something, I've talked to Terry Tempest Williams a little bit about this question too, but it's almost like what is the body of literature, almost of scripture, of that we share, that cuts across Indigenous groups, across different religious communities, across the humanities, but that could bring us all together, that have this shared commitment to the new path that you're talking about. And have there been efforts to bring that together in some fashion?
I think of many books that have tried to do that, but more in an intellectual framework, as opposed to that medicine wheel framework of mind, body, emotion, and spirit. And you're right. We need to gather and learn together the stories for our time. And thank you for conceiving of this and beginning to work on it.
Okay, I'm getting a message that we have a couple minutes more. Oh no, we're done. Okay, so I better wrap things up, but just an enormous thank you for being with us, for setting the tone for really the rest of the week. Your words couldn't have resonated more beautifully, I think, with our community and really with the theme of this week's coming together. So thank you for being with us. The next sessions will be exploring many of these ideas in more detail from different perspectives. Thank you.
Miigwech, thank you all. Have a wonderful gathering.
All right. All right, we welcome everybody to come to the next session, which will be starting in about 10 minutes.